Hello, it's worth having a short recap of what's going on in Russia and why Putin has mobilized and whether that is going to restore the fading morale in the Russian army and whether or not it's going to turn the war round to Putin's aims. Of course, we know that the Russian winter is fast approaching, and an army which is prepared to fight in the winter or simply has the numbers to withstand an attack may well survive, may well be successful. This is what happened, of course, in Stalingrad. This is what turned the tables on the Hitler advance and the Napoleon advance. It was the Russian winter. So the question is, can the Ukrainian army withstand the onslaught of the Russian winter, and are the Russian troops, or are there Russian troops that are ready to fight in the snow gear in a Russian winter war? That's the question. And so it's all about supplies. Now, we know the other day Putin sacked his logistics commander, who simply wasn't providing what was necessary. The question really is, can Russia supply, equip, arm the newly mobilized young men who have just been called up? My hunch is it can't. My hunch is that the mobilization is quite simply a ruse. It's quite simply a ruse, and it's to keep the domestic audience quiet. It's to calm the hawks in Putin's own group. And the problem is, at the moment, should Putin be toppled, he's likely to be replaced by somebody significantly nastier. The hawks have the loudest voice at this moment. Yes, of course, there are also liberals, particularly from around the country, who are protesting. There are people fleeing to the border. These are effectively protesting. The Ukrainian response is that the people going to the border should be turned back so that they then actively protest against their regime. I don't think that would do very much good, I'm afraid. We saw what happened in Belarus. While the inner command and while the army is supporting the present regime, it doesn't really matter how many people are going to be protesting. If Putin isn't interested in their lives, he's hardly interested in their opinions. Let's look briefly at, or let's recap about the Wagner group. The thing which we learnt the other day was genuinely founded by Yevgeny Prigozhin, the man who is otherwise famous as Putin's chef. Not Putin's chief, Putin's chef. He has a catering company in St. Petersburg which produces second-rate food. Second-rate food, he provides food for schools around the country and rations for the army. And we know that the rations he provided for the army at the beginning of the war had an expiry date of 2015. So he's not only the chef, he's a bad chef. And why are we surprised by that? We're not. This man had done 9 years in prison for robbery. So he's a violent criminal as well as a cheat. And how do we know even more that he's a cheat? Because for years he's been denying that he had anything to do with the Wagner group. And yet finally he comes clean. Finally he says that indeed that is the group that he founded and sponsored and supports. Indeed, he's been filmed in prisons, recruiting prisoners and saying, we want you, if you fight for us, if you do 1 year's service, your prison record is removed and you're free. But if you go AWOL during that time, we'll shoot you if we find you. I wonder how many of them will go AWOL. And the point is that he's taken a number of journalists, quite a lot of journalists, to court on libel charges and won significant damages because they suspected or fingered him for being the person connected to the Wagner group, whether he was the actual founder or simply the person who bankrolled it. And each time he's denied it, and each time, because the courts, of course, are equally corrupt in Russia, he's been given a large payoff. Most recently, against a person who ran a thing called Echo Moskvy, Alexei Venedicta, huge damages against him. And Medusa, that jellyfish organization, which operates a really good catch-up of news in Russia still, they also attacked him. They were also attacked legally. And all of that is baseless because he really is the person who runs the Wagner Group. And the Wagner Group, called the Wagner Group because apparently he likes Richard Wagner. Well, who doesn't? But, even Hitler liked Richard Wagner. The Wagner Group has done service in Libya, Syria, Sudan, Mozambique, Venezuela probably, and now Ukraine. It was the group that was sent in 2014 to seize Donetsk and Luhansk. These are the territories that are the basis, the foundation of the current war. And that is mixed with this Novorussia rubbish, which is actually about an area directly above Crimea, got little to do with the Donetsk area. So Putin's war is based on criminality and flimsy justification, and it's worth remembering this. Indeed, the Wagner Group, which was supposed to be an elite group, two interesting points about that. Number one, it's supposed to be elite. It's supposed to attract people who've had between 1 year and 5 years of elite military service. Now it's prepared to recruit prisoners. It actually started putting out recruitment videos a while ago, promising travel and friendship, learning lots of languages, videos. I think the video was filmed in Syria, incidentally. Romanticized views of being a mercenary. And this, of course, would ultimately make up for the loss of 50,000 plus soldiers who have been killed or maimed in Ukraine so far in the war. But this is the crunch. Russian law makes it quite clear that it is illegal, it is prohibited to create and maintain a private army. And at the same time, Russian law and Russian propaganda goes on and on and on about so-called mercenaries, so-called Western mercenaries, people like Aden Aslan, who are not mercenaries at all, while basing its own war entirely on the strength of an army which is absolutely and utterly mercenary in origin and form. So it's worth looking at this. It's also worth looking at the loss of morale across the Russian military in general, and across now the Russian society in general. You can think, for example, about the shooting the other day of Alexander Alexiev, who was manning a draft centre in the east of the country, critically wounded and taken to hospital because people are desperate not to get drafted into a war which they know is useless. They know they cannot be properly equipped. They know they won't be properly trained. They are purely being drafted as cannon fodder. Now, the propagandists, and a few of them follow my channel. They know who they are, so do I. The propagandists, these people will say, well, Ukraine has also suffered casualties. Ukraine doesn't tell us the names of the people who were slaughtered in Bucha. Why not? Well, why should it? Why should it? Ukraine has suffered casualties. But the difference is the Ukrainian casualties, I believe, are slightly lower than the Russian casualties. Russian casualties have not been admitted. Russia has admitted to 5,000 people who have died. That number is at least 10 times that. And the Ukrainians know what they're fighting for. They know what if necessary, they're dying for. They're dying for their homeland. They're dying to protect their country from an invasion. Russians have no idea what they're dying for or what they're fighting for. They're fighting for, they've been fed. The population has been fed a lie that is fast unraveling. And huge numbers are going to the borders. Huge numbers are going to the borders to avoid the draft. I'd like to know, of course, that many people who are well connected have avoided the draft. People in the Kremlin have told their children to clear out. I know that as a fact. What about Ilya Medvedev? The other day, there was a very interesting newspaper article about him and what a wonderful young man he is. I'm sure it's true. Is he drafted? Has he volunteered? Is he among the so-called 10,000 people the 10,000 young men who were recruited in one day at recruiting stations? I don't believe that figure. I don't believe anything near that number volunteered to join the Russian army. This is, again, propaganda and rubbish. If we knew about if that number was real, we would have had photographic evidence of the queues outside the recruiting stations. Instead, we've had photographic evidence of people looting and burning recruiting stations. So this isn't true. This isn't true. And there's so much that we can say categorically is not true about Russian propaganda. And I'm sure there will be a great deal written under here by the trolls, the Russian propagandists. I will dutifully answer as much as I can. But, we do get tired of hearing the same rubbish again and again. So I hope this time they're going to be a little bit more creative with their lies. Have fun, and let's keep soldiering on. I'm sure at some point we will have the sort of leader who can lead us against this madman Putin, this dictator. Oh, and by the way, just to answer one of these trolls, why should I take an interest in the internal government of Russia? Well, I don't. But when the internal government of Russia, that is Putin, invades another country, then it actually becomes our responsibility around the world to take an interest in that and to condemn him. And by condemning him, we are also condemning that government. So, of course, we take an interest in the internal runnings of Russia once Russia invades another country. Fact. And that's the answer. Bye.